Don't get your arm caught in the door this time. There was a lot of really good fellowship out in the hall there. They had to flash the lights to get everybody to come in. How's everybody doing? Everybody doing okay? Yeah, so as I was preparing this morning, I was thinking, when they teach you to facilitate workshops, classes, generally speaking, you would open with an icebreaker, right? So when I did these workshops for T-Mobile, we always had some canned icebreakers, and you could do your own if you want. We've never done an icebreaker in here, and I don't know that we'll start, but I thought a good icebreaker would be to ask Brother Bill. You guys have seen the whole drone thing going on in New Jersey, right? Drones everywhere. UFOs were under attack. Brother Bill works for the government, and he does all kinds of really crazy, scary stuff that he couldn't discuss with us. But I thought he could maybe give us his theory on the drones. Or would that be breaking top secret clearance if you did that, Bill?
Listen to or watch the news over weeks, so I honestly don't even know what's going on.
Okay, so I guess that's a bad icebreaker then. We didn't get any information.
That's my canned response.
Yeah, I've heard various people say, shoot him down and do a number of things. So anyway, I thought it'd be interesting to put Bill on the spot. He does all sorts of top secret stuff. I thought maybe he could give us a glimpse of what's going on. That's my first and last icebreaker. I guess we'll get to class. All right, so, we spent a significant amount of time the last number of weeks, really months, going through chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Job. We're going to jump into chapter 3 today. And actually, I prepared for kind of 3 through 6 today. There was some thought of, do we just kind of do a really high-level overview of kind of chapters 3 through 38, because there's a lot of speeches and back and forth. But as I was preparing, I felt like I think chapter 3, really chapter 4 and into chapter 5, it gives us some additional insight into, Job the human being and, what he was experiencing. It elaborates a little bit more beyond kind of the facts of the event, right? If you think about what we saw in chapter 1 and what we saw in chapter 2, we talked about Job's life, and then we talked about, what was happening to Job in terms of the loss of his possessions and family, etc. Now, as you get into chapter 3 and chapter 4 and chapter 5, we get a deeper glimpse into his emotion and really, spiritually, how he's dealing, with those losses. So I thought that would be valuable to us to do that. Brother Haley, he has a really good kind of setup into chapter 3, and I brought my glasses in addition to my contacts today, so I'm going to be double vision here, so I can read this clearly, right? Don't laugh, Jack. Jack's home, so I'm embarrassing him, I'm sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with reading his setup to chapter 3, and I actually have throughout my notes probably 4 or 5 times where I will refer to the book today. So here we go. Suddenly and without warning, Job found himself no longer the honored person of the land of Uz, wealthy and respected, esteemed by his fellow man, but a man cast down to the depths, seated on the ground in the city, ash heap, lonely and suffering. It was as if a great earthquake had shaken the world about him, bringing down upon him the destruction of total ruin. He was buried to the neck beneath the rubble, the prisoner of calamities for which he had no explanation. And I think that's an important piece just to highlight. Job still had no idea why all this was brought upon him. And if you think back to what we've discussed, in a number of classes, at this time, there was this belief that, if you were favorable with God, if you were, devout, if you, had a strong faith, that you would be blessed materially, and that if you lost those possessions or something, adverse happened to you, it was because you were being punished for some sort of sin. So, the understanding of why it was happening was really, 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 really critical at this point in time. And then it goes on to say, in such state, he cursed the day of his birth, which we'll read about here in chapter 3, thereby pronouncing it void of blessings, devoted to destruction. There is no doubt that in the 7-day silence he had recognized the suspicious that welled up in the hearts of his friends, or I should say the suspicions. Becoming impatient at his friends' long silence, Job opened the dialogue, which would now continue through 3 cycles. In his bewilderment, life was now a series of whys. Why was I born? Why did I not die from the womb? Why is my life still prolonged that I cannot escape my awful lot? This frame of mind occasions his first speech, right? So once again, you have a lot of, you have Job here just wrestling with why me, God? Why me, right? But what's really interesting, and we'll see this as we go through chapters 3, 4, and 5, at no point does Job blame God, right? Like at no point does he blame God. And what I find most interesting, and hopefully I can articulate that well, I think Job approached this loss. He was so earnest in his desire to understand, but it was seeking to understand from the right place, right? It wasn't seeking to understand just because he was angry with God, right? He was seeking to understand because he felt that, he had done something, or that he, God had inflicted all this on him for some reason that he just couldn't understand. And at no time, which is really remarkable here, did he question God, in my opinion. I know others may feel differently, out of anger at God, for what he did. He looked inward, he looked inward throughout all of these chapters. So in verses 1 through 10 of chapter 3, I'm not going to read through every single verse here. I've just selected a few here and there. So verses 1 and 10, Job is essentially saying, why should one should be born if this was his lot in life, right? And he laments his birth. So I'm going to read kind of verses 1 through 3 here. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said a man is conceived, right? So once again, if you think about it, Job wants to be removed from all this, but he's questioning, like, why was I even born if this was my lot, right? Any thoughts on that? That being his response. Why was he even born if this is what I have to deal with?
Well, we wouldn't have the story.
Yeah, that's true, right? Okay, we wouldn't have a story. Okay, absolutely, that's one.
Have we not all felt that way at one point?
The comment up here was, have we not all felt that way at some point, right?
Well, that's a focus on the self, too. He's
Yeah.
wondering, what have I done? Why was I even here? This is how it's going to end up.
What good am I?
Also tells you about how he had thought about how his life was going to be.
Right.
Or supposed it was going to be.
Yeah, and you wonder if the sharp contrast between Job today in chapter 3 versus Job in chapter 1, obviously he was on top of the world, and now he's at the very bottom, of the world. Very sharp contrast from what was versus what is today. I'll come over here.
Why was I even born? Because I've been a curse to God.
Okay, so the comment was, why was I even born? Because I've been a curse to God. Did I say that right? Allie, any thoughts on this? You've been quiet up here.
I've been through a lot in my life,
Okay.
but I've never asked the question, why was I born?
Right.
Because to me, it hasn't never gotten that bad to me. I've been through illnesses, I was just telling my brother, I've had a pulmonary embolism, I've had a stroke, I've had total knee replacement, and I just had double hernia surgery, but I've never asked myself, why was I born? I want to stay here as long as I can. I want to be like Jimmy Cricket. I want to live to be 100.
Yeah, so Allie's comment, and I love the wisdom, not just, the fact that Brother Allie, was, a minister in the Lord's church for many years, but I love his wisdom, right? And he always has a good take on things. And, I think your personal experience is, if you look at all of the different things you face with your health and a number of things, that's not a place that you've arrived, right? So I think the point here is Job is at a low point, right, as we get into chapter 3. And, what Brother Haley said, this is really interesting. I don't have any additional thoughts on this, but his comment was, Job was speaking adversely of the providence and rule of God as he cast reflection upon his righteous ways, right? So I thought that was an interesting take, right? He's God has a plan here, right? And he doesn't yet understand God's plan, but clearly God has a plan. Now, he was a man of faith, he was blameless, etc., but, God has a plan, okay? So, Job, so the first part in 1 through 10, he questions why was he even born, right? And then as we get into verses 11 through 19, he asks why he did not die at birth. So we'll just look at verses 11 through 13 here. Why did I not die at birth, come out of the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me? Or why the breasts that I should nurse? For when I would have lain down and been quiet, I would have slept, then I would have been at rest, right? So, he goes from why was I born to, why didn't I perish, when I was born? That's a pretty big range of emotions, right? And it's pretty deep emotions, right? And I think we all go through different challenges in life, but there's some serious questioning going on here. Lila.
I want to say, and I hope I can say it's great. When a person gets to the point where he commits suicide, I just heard this recently. We had a friend, my daughter-in-law's brother-in-law. When they get that point, and this, even one in our church that did this, when they get that point that they decided they can't handle anything that they have going on, what they're thinking is, and I just heard this recently is good, is they don't have a solution. They don't have a solution of the multiple problems that they have. So you can feel how you do about suicide, but to me, it's a person that's so mental because he's gotten away from reality so much of what he could do to carry on with life. I don't know about you either, Allie, but I'm like you. We've been through a lot too, and everybody here has been through trials and tribulations. But the thing of it is, you look at each other as a husband and wife, and you say, okay, what are we going to do now? Of course, us in this church are going to say, return to God. But I'm just saying that about suicide, if you get to that point, the fact is that they cannot come up with that solution of all these things that happen to him, that happen to them, that they usually end up, that's what they do.
Yeah, so
So sad, so sad. But by the way, we're on the highest rate. It's awful, especially with teenagers.
So Lila mentioned, I don't know if all of you could hear the comments in the back, but Lila mentioned suicide. And I think it's really important to point out here, and Brother Haley writes a fair amount about this. I intentionally didn't address it, right? But, one of the things he makes clear in here, at no point did Job, give any indication that he contemplated suicide, right? So I think that's really important. And it's funny that you say, I shouldn't say it's funny. That's a really bad, that's a really bad point. But I didn't mean it was funny. But it's interesting, Lila, that you make the observation about suicide, being at all-time highs, right? Like, if you think of Job, he was very grounded in his faith, right? He had a strong faith, and he was, he knew who he was. He knew who his God was. And so, as he was going through this, while he wanted to understand why, he was taking the blame, in many cases, and looking within, right? And he did not, and if you think about everything he says really throughout all of chapter 3, and I only read a few verses, like, he's asking God why he even allows him to continue to live, but at no point does he say to God, I want to end my life, right? Like, he's questioning God, why would I go through all this? And so, suicide rates in the U.S. I'm by no expert or anything, but if you think we've moved further and further and further away from God, right, as a society, right, and fewer people, believe in God, fewer and fewer people regularly attend church, I have to believe there's some correlation between, your faith and being grounded in your faith and understanding, that the world is temporary, right? Versus, having no faith, right? And really having nowhere to turn with those thoughts, right? I mean, Job is walking us through here in chapter 3 a great, while it's hard to read, if you read it every verse, and once again, I didn't read through every verse, he's walking us through really a good way to look at, within when things are tough, right? But at the same time, taking comfort that God's in control. At no point did he try to take control, and I'll come to you. At no point did he try to take control here. He's asking God, right? Like, taking control would have meant he would have done something to proactively harm himself. But instead, he's allowing God to be in control, and he wants to understand, what God is doing here. Go ahead.
I think Lila made a great point. If anybody was a candidate for suicide, it would have been him. And he knows, being a righteous man, that was a sin. And so you could tell somebody considering suicide, say, hey, stick in there. Job had it rougher than you. And he didn't consider suicide, and look what happened to him. It gets better. So this is really a good chapter to talk to somebody about that, if they're considering it. That here's a guy who suffered really by the devil. And he didn't even contemplate suicide, like you said. So it's a good lesson for those who are contemplating suicide not to do it.
Yeah.
Job did not do it.
Go ahead.
Any person that's mentally competent, we have people in the world that are not mentally competent, but a person that has good senses and contemplates suicide is showing a lack of faith in God.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no question. I mean, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole too far, but given that Lila pointed it out, I think it was just worth noting that, this is a really good example of somebody being at the lowest point of their life in terms of, the personal loss and then the health, situation with him. And he still, once again, remained faithful. And at no point did he think about ending it himself.
He's trying to figure it out.
Yes.
Just why was I even here? This happened and I was at the top of the world, and now all of a sudden I'm not there anymore. And, he's going through that with his own mind, trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Like you said, at no time does he ever curse God and die.
Right. Yeah, if you think about how faithful Job was going into this, and then you think about, what he's going through in chapter 3, and then as we get into chapter 4, kind of the back and forth with his friends, how much more that developed an already strong faith, right? Like, and so, it's really interesting. It's a really interesting exercise to look at this, right? And I certainly can't do it justice because there's some, if you go verse by verse, there's literally like a paragraph or two for each verse in the commentary. And Brother Haley does a much better job than I do. But, if you want to check out Brother Haley's, commentary and really dive into chapter 3, he gives some deep insight and reflection on each of those verses. We'd be doing this until, 2026 if I went through each verse. I have one more comment up here.
Actually, his wife that told him to kill himself.
Yeah.
And Job lived out, we see Job living out what he said. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? And this, you see him doing this. He's receiving the evil. He's venting.
Right.
Vent. But it's a good thing he did listen to his wife, because she's the one that suggested it.
Yeah, we had a really good discussion about Job's wife last week, and showing her the grace that I think we would all like to have in a situation like that. I am going to read 20 through the end of the chapter, and then we'll talk about that, just because I thought it would be interesting. So, I'm going to start in verse 20, and I'm reading from the ESV. Why is a light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it comes not, and dig for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, from whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes instead of my bread, and my groanings are poured out like water. For the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes, right? So some pretty deep verses there that you know, once again, he's searching to understand, right? He's searching. And so this is what Brother Haley said on this. He says, there's no question, but in this section, and once again, we're talking about verses 20 through 26, Job appears to be bewildered. These verses 20 and 22 are one long sentence in the form of a question in which he seems to be asked, what is the meaning of life such as his? Does it have no purpose other than to suffer as he is suffering? To him, it had become an unsolvable mystery in which death was the best solution. Very, interesting observation. And so he asked why the light of life should be given to one in his misery and bitterness of his soul. Why should death and darkness of oblivion that are so desired be unattainable? Thoughts on both the comments, and I've got some more to read there. Thoughts on both the comments and like I said, Brother Haley does a much better job of articulating, what Job's thinking, as you read those verses.
That stands out is verse 25. For the thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened. So well, I'll just speak for myself. I have some fears about things, but God has a different plan. Even though I may have that fear, you have to give it to God.
Yeah, so the comment was, obviously we have fears and concerns in our life, right? God knows those fears and concerns, probably often hears about them in our prayers, right? So he hears about them from us, right? And even though they are deep fears and concerns of ours, that doesn't mean that those, won't be used at some point, to test us and to help, further refine our faith, right? If you think about, once again, all this, there's two elements to what Job is going through. There's the element of God proving to Satan that, there are people on earth who love God, genuinely because he's God and have a relationship with God, and they're not doing it because, once again, what was Satan's argument? Satan's argument was that man serves God because God provides blessings for them. They're doing it because they're selfish. They're doing it, for their own gain, right? So part of what, God is doing here is to prove to Satan that, man will serve him because he loves him, because man loves God, right? And he's not doing it for selfish purposes, right? And then the other part of this is, obviously God knows Job can handle this, so he's strengthening his faith. And to your point, there's a story here for men and mankind to study, for hundreds, thousands of years, right? Since it was documented. So any thoughts on kind of Job's yearning here or questions about why light continues to be given to someone in these circumstances?
I think your answer is Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 29. Was the secret things belong to God.
Yes.
So these things happened to Job because God allowed them, and he's never done anything wrong. We cannot question God.
Yeah.
The only question we could ask when we ask why something bad is happening to us, when something good happens to us, we should ask the same question.
Yeah, no, and we did talk on this, right? We often say, God, why did this happen? But we rarely say, God, why did you give me this blessing, right? So you're absolutely right. But once again, I think this is, and I'll come back to you, Matthew, in just a second. I think this is a good example of looking at, someone who loves God and is faithful to God, and them working through, and I'm going to call it, some may not agree with this, but I'm going to call it in a healthy way. And when I say a healthy way, he's looking, genuinely seeking to understand, not blaming God in this situation, as a situation, that was once again, losing children, losing possessions, losing all the things he lost, right? Seeking to understand. Matthew.
I think this chapter has a little bit of a mega story, where in the first part, the metaphor is darkness, and the second part, pivots after we see the appearance of the Leviathan and the chaos creature to light. So we see no change in Job's attitude, but I think that there's the language changes from our existence and struggle with darkness, which is chaos, to our participation in God's creation, which is light.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good observation. And once again, I think if you I'll come to you in just 1 second, Ben. I think if you break this down into these 3 sections, right? You know, why was I born? Why didn't I die at birth? And then the last one, you know, why do I continue to live, right? Like, and you look at Job as he wrestled with these. So it's a good example, you know, for all of us in terms of, you know, how we might wrestle with things. I'll come. Let me grab that first.
Yeah. Why am I alive? Why am I suffering through this? Well, you don't know what God has planned for you.
Right.
And you don't know what good influence you may be able to have even in your current condition. So this goes back to just putting it into God's hands.
Absolutely.
Trusting that faith.
Good comment, Dan.
We can see everything that Job went through here, and
Yeah.
how wrong he was, and what dilemma he's in now. Not for Job at all, but for us.
Yeah.
Because God's plan wasn't for Job at that time to be anything other than Job.
Mm-hmm.
But it's for our own purpose and wisdom that we look at this, study it, and emulate what God has done, what he will do, if we follow that.
Yeah, so let me ask this. I'm going to ask kind of a question here that you just made me think of. So let's pretend for a minute that you've never read the book of Job. And let's pretend that it ended right here, you know, and this is all you know, okay? You know, what would your thoughts be, you know, up to this point, right? Because once again, you know, as Job and his 3 friends are, you know, experiencing this, right? Like, what would you think if you didn't know the ending to the story here?
Question whether God was a just God.
Okay, so one, you would question if God's a just God. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer here. I'm just asking, like, you know, you mentioned we can see, right? Like, we see the story, right? We see it unfold. We've read it, you know, dozens of times, right? What would your thoughts be if it just stopped here?
Well, if that was the end of the story, then he should have took his wife's advice.
If that was the end of the story, then he should have taken his wife's advice.
That's why you're talking.
That's all right. Any other thoughts?
But you never question God.
Okay.
You never say that he's unjust.
Okay.
All of his decisions are right. That's said many times in Scripture. But you never question God about anything.
Yeah, so the reason why I asked that question is, right, if you think about the world we live in today, you know, we have the Bible, right? We have the answers, right? And if you just think of the many different events that we read of, you know, throughout the Bible, and I was thinking of Peter this morning as I was thinking about some preparation for, you know, potentially preaching on Sunday night next month. And, you know, it's really easy. Well, you would think it should be really easy for us to be faithful because we see the beginning, the middle, and the end, you know, of all these great stories, right? And we have the example, both positive and negative in terms of, you know, how people of great faith reacted, you know, in the Bible over time. So it's easy for us, really, you would think, to sit in here and say, hey, you know, Job, this all worked out for Job, right? But at this point in time, once again, as we're documenting, you know, the end of chapter 3 here and transitioning to chapter 4, you know, Job didn't know how this was going to end. Job's friends didn't know how this was going to end, you know. So that's why I asked the question, right? All right, we're going to move into chapter 4 here, and I'm going to start by looking at page 55. So what we have here, oh, there's a question back here, sorry.
A quick comment. You pose an interesting question there. What if it were to end right there? Quick comment that I think we all should keep in mind, and that is that it is important for us to know that Job has, he never receives an answer to his question. He never does. Why that is important is that in our walk of life, we're going to come to some things, things will happen that will not make any sense. And this story right here, we need to like take hold of it and grasp the meaning. God is in control. We need to trust God, and that's what Job's doing. He can say that he's crushed, he doesn't understand, he'd like to understand, but he doesn't need to understand. He'd like to, but he doesn't need to. And that steadfastness is what we need to take away from the book of Job.
Yeah, every time you speak, I think that you make tremendous comments. I think that's another great comment, right? We just don't know sometimes, right? And if you think about it, beginning to end, this story has a happy ending, right? At the end of the day, but not all stories do, to your point, right? Like at the end of the day, we may never get an answer, or, and Job, to your point, didn't really get a clear answer, but Job came out on the high side here. But, there are many who don't come out on the high side, right?
Fast forward to beginning to chapter 38, God answered Job with a bunch of rhetorical questions. See, he began by, who is this that darkness counsel by word without knowledge? He answers Job's question of why with a bunch of rhetorical questions.
He makes his point, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Dave, you were going to make a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we have the advantage of having the Bible and the Word and knowing that God has a plan for us and that all things work together for those that love the Lord and all those kinds of things. They give us strength. They give us hope to persevere through things. I don't think Job had any of that. Right? He was experiencing it, and which is all more impressive in his response. But we're fortunate to have that and know that God has a plan for us. And
yeah.
Strength. Right? And when you think about people that are separated from, that are, moving away from God or separated from God, they lose sight of those things as well. And when they go through these trials, their experience is probably much more like Job's.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, great comment, Dave. I think, what I'm left with, and we only have a couple more weeks here, but, what I'm left with probably more than ever, as we've studied this is like we have all the answers, right? The question becomes like, we don't necessarily have all the answers to our questions, right? But we have all the answers, we have all these examples that the more time you spend in the Word, the easier it is to understand and the easier it is to remain faithful, right? Like it's easy to read and forget, but right, the more you study it, the more you look at it, and you hear, Tad say that all the time, if you're in the Word, you're going to be in a better position to respond, when Satan does come.
This shows how grateful we should be for God's blessings, because this is what a man looks like who's had all those blessings except for life itself stripped away. Everything else was a blessing from God. And even non-believers enjoy a lot of those blessings. But he was, the most righteous man there, and for him to have them stripped away, just shows how thankful we should be for those blessings.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
But the thing about it is, I know myself, the more obedient I can be to my Lord, and also sustain sin, the more faith I can get and do get. And I think this is what happened to Job. I don't think it happened when he was young. I think he always stayed away from sin, and he always stayed so obedient to God that when he came through all this, because we all, I don't know about you, but losing a whole family. Terry's been a fireman here in Waterford, and he fought a fire that the whole family just burned. 5 of them. We buried the family over here and go outside and work. My sister and I worked on that dinner. But to see those 5 hearse, I don't know about you, but you could never be the same person. I don't know how you could be. You lose your whole family. I want to mention this in a way, but there's a man up on White Lake, and on Easter morning, going down 23, lost his whole family, but him. He said, my wife was a medium, that none of them had seatbelts on, but they had a big SUV. But how can you be normal to see this? Job had something that all of us sitting here are striving for, to be obedient and stay from sin and to have faith. That's got to be the bottom line, because what else is it?
Yeah, and Lila, it's interesting that you say that, and the comment was made over here as well, right? If you think about us as Christians, and we oftentimes will have the opportunity to counsel, support, pray for people who experience loss, right? And while during the first 24 hours or 48 hours, it may not be appropriate, right? But after that, after that immediate period of shock wears off, right? There's probably an opportunity to delve into Job and say, hey, let me show you a story of someone who was in your shoes and how they reacted to it. And it's probably a good way to minister to somebody and potentially bring them to the Lord, if they're not already a Christian, right?
Well, I understand what Allie's saying about doubt and always not to have the doubt. But talk to people in the world. They don't know Him. They don't know God. They don't have faith. They don't know it. They don't know the goodness. Why wouldn't they have doubt?
Well, I don't think Allie said anything about us not having doubt. I think it goes back to, and Allie, you correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, right? Like, for those of us who are believers and those of us who know the Word, we have to strive for a level of trust and a level of belief where we are comfortable not questioning God. Although we all know there's going to become a point in, where something happens to us where we're going to want to know why, right? He does have plans for us, right? But those plans aren't always written out, and once again, when you're going through it, you just don't know, more often than not, right? All right, so we have 5 minutes left. Another class to go through another chapter. I thought we were going to go through 3. I do, yeah, Dan. Or was that Jeff had a comment? Go ahead, Jeff.
Real quick, I was just going to say, on Wednesday nights with the teens, we had been going through a study of the book of Revelation because the kids wanted to, and quite honestly, I was gritting my teeth through. I was like, this is a hard book to go through and study. There's, as I keep saying, sometimes 7 means 7, and sometimes 7 means perfection, and there's just so much. But one of the key things going through that I kept going back to the kids is the fact that we have the complete story. What does that mean? I think that it's showing us God's love, because the Bible could just talk to us about God's perfection and God's power, but we are actually told, this is how it ends. This is how I win. And we've got that they're in our minds at all times. So as we're going through these kind of struggles, we might not ever understand. But God loves us so much that He shows us, hey, this is the big picture. I win.
Yeah, and that's well said, right? This is the big picture, and I win. I was going to say, I didn't want to interrupt you, but a study of Revelation anytime is challenging. A study of Revelation with teens, like, you are a brave person. You really are. So listen, I see, Ken, you had a comment.
I had my Bible open to Isaiah 40, and it kind of speaks to this to me, if I can read it real quick.
Yeah, please do.
So, the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and His understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength for the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord, they will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not be faint. I think that's for me the message. It's our hope has to be well past this life. It has to be in the one who gave this life.
Yeah, internal perspective. A great point, Ken. I think one of the things that interested me as we've gone through this, and I want to start looking at is kind of looking at the spiritual journey of some folks within the Bible, as they matured and the different events that happened to them, and trying to see what we can learn from that, right? I mean, because we're all on a spiritual journey, right? I've said this repeatedly, like we all mature at different times, right? And we know where Job started his journey, at least as it comes to this event, right? I mean, God said he was blameless. God said he was upright. Like he started in a great place. And you still look at kind of the challenges he faced, as it happened, and then kind of post, happening. And so, one of the things I really want to look at is just take 2 or 3, folks in the Bible and really look at that spiritual journey and the spiritual maturity, and, keeping in mind, like we all mature at different, rates. We all, mature based on different events. And I just think it's kind of something worth taking a deeper dive into. So I'm not going to jump into chapter 4 with like 2 minutes left. Maybe for the first time, unless there's another comment, for the first time all quarter, I'll let you guys out. Dan has a comment.
We have all the answers we need, not all the answers we want.
Very well said. Yeah. That is very well said, Dan. All the answers we need, but not all the answers we want. Bill?
One of the things I find most interesting, or very, very interesting about Job, is the fact that Job was written about a man during the time in which God spoke directly to the leaders. And so as you go into, like was mentioned, as you go into the later chapters, 30, 37, or at least 38, 39, and 40, God is speaking directly to Job. And this is probably one of the most interesting things in my mind, is that the direct relationship that Job had with God, the creator of the universe, to speak directly with the creator of the universe, obviously strengthened him beyond what we could possibly imagine. So what does that tell us about who we should be talking to, right? We need to increase our relationship with God, and we need to strengthen that communication. As Dan said, all the answers that we need have been written down and are given to us. They may not be all the answers that we want, but our communication with God is a two-way street. It's us speaking to God and God speaking to us through his word. So, Job had the direct communication with God. We need to increase our communication with God.
Yeah, well said, Bill.
That was a patriarchal justification.
So all right, we'll end it on that. We'll see you next week. Everybody have a great week.